so I can be helpful to you is, how are you intending to use the information? And yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about the project so I can be of the most help to you?
I don't want to take too much of our time taking up
Yeah.
talking about it. So what I'm doing is doing these informational interviews, and then I'm going to compile everyone's story into a short story with a booklet of short stories, kind of who you are, what you do, but more importantly, who you are as an individual outside of business and what everyone can take away from your story. And then either notes or a video of the interview, depending on the class, is going to be dispersed without the cannabis studies program for that library to be used.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Okay, great. So I can start a little bit with, yes, I did go to Miami University. I studied psychology. I actually focused on childhood development psychology. The reason for that is because I actually thought I wanted to be, at the time, I wanted to be a human rights attorney. One of my idols was Amal Clooney. I have a strong sense of like, I always want, justice for all people, equality, things like that. And one of the things they tell you when you want to go to a great law school is just major in something inherently interested in.
Mhm.
And psychology has always been that for me. I've always been interested in how people think, why they think the way they think, maybe how has their childhood impacted the way they think as an adult, the way they view the world, the way they I find it interesting that you and I could watch a presentation or watch an interaction with somebody, and the way we perceive it could be so different based on our lived experiences. And so I really always wanted to study that. Through like a series of events, I actually didn't end up going to law school. I got an internship at Abercrombie and Fitch at their headquarters, which is actually in Columbus, Ohio. And it was a really competitive internship. So the fact that they had thousands of people apply to this internship. And I think at the time they only have like 30 spots. And so I accepted that summer internship when I was a junior going into being a senior. And it was to be a merchandising intern, which really didn't mean that much to me at the time. But it wasn't until I actually got into the internship that I realized that I had this love for business that I didn't really quite understand before because I had majored in psychology.
Mhm.
So all of my classes were focused on, abnormal psych or like history of psychology, childhood development, nothing business related. So I quickly learned a lot of ins and outs of business when I was an intern there. They very much immerse their interns. They treat them like a piece of the team. And they have a program, like a whole training program. So you'd go from, one meeting where you're talking about what trends are coming down based on, what's going on runway or what's going on in these aspirational brands. Then go to the next meeting talking about, okay, how much inventory do we have left of items and what's our margin going to be on this product? So, and then how are we going to market it? And then, oh, wait, this isn't selling as well as we thought. Like, what do we need to do to get through the inventory? So you quickly had to learn and be very nimble between when you're a merchant, you're like half creative and half, analytical.
Mhm.
And I really, really loved that. And then that's when I kind of grew to understand that I liked business. And what I really understood through that experience is that business is a lot of analytical, but a lot of it's psychology too, especially when you're dealing with the end consumer.
And marketing
Um,
is
how
huge.
exactly right. And I was in college 2011 through 2015. So it wasn't mainstream like psychology, therapy, having a psychologist and going to therapy. These things are now more mainstream things, but 10 years ago, they weren't yet like mainstream, I would say. So the idea that psychology overlapped with business was still kind of like the initial pieces of that idea was there, but it really it's almost like business and psychology, like they completely overlap now
Mhm.
in today's world if you're going to school. So that was really interesting to me. And then I ended up staying there for 3 years. And I really loved it. It was the exact amount of being able to be creative, but then also being able to be analytical at the same time. And I think that's what being an entrepreneur really is constantly toggling the hats of being creative, but then also being entrepreneurial. And creative it doesn't need to mean like you come up with the best marketing campaign. It means being creative to think of a new idea, a new way of doing something. And so you kind of get to mix art and analytical together, which I really appreciate about business and actually entrepreneurship in general.
Definitely. I come from a digital marketing background, so I love mixing it. One, psychology, how people think, how are you going to market towards this consumer versus when you're meeting with people, that kind of thing. So when you're learning all of these takeaways and even something, it might feel like a long time ago, your internship with Abercrombie, but
Yeah.
how did you take that experience from not so long ago to what you're doing now? Kind of like you're saying, there is a lot of creative, but there's also a lot of analytical. So how does that balance? Actually, I'm sorry, two-prong. That's one
Yeah.
question. How does that work, the balance with what you're doing now? And then two, if you don't mind firstly explaining the model of Leaf and then
Yes.
how you grew it.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll answer the first part of your question first because I think it leads into the second part. But the first is when I was at Abercrombie, one thing I was there when they had their prior CEO and founder there. His name is Mike Jeffries. He's in the fashion retail world. He's quite a famous name. He's known for making Abercrombie
He's definitely popped up a few times.
yeah,
Yeah.
the worldwide brand that we all know. So there's a lot to learn from him. And I was there. I presented to him when I was an intern. I got to watch what the company was like while he was there. When I came back to be a full-time employee, they actually transitioned. He was transitioning out, and they brought in a new president. Her name's Fran Horowitz, and she is now also in her own right considered one of the most successful CEOs in all of fashion. And she's driven Abercrombie's quarterly earnings up. I mean, it's like almost insane. It's really insane to see Abercrombie's earnings in the past 5 years and the growth that they've seen. So she's really known for having turned around the brand. So I got to work under her and her leadership. And one of the things, she probably didn't even know my name at the time, but one of the things that became quickly apparent was how much she valued that the merchants and the people running the individual businesses were in stores. So one of the first things that we did was we would go work in stores. So merchants on Black Friday had to work Black Friday, which was crazy. We would be in the store. Yeah, we would be in the store at least 2 to 3 times a month. And that was awesome. Like that whole idea, like we were not doing that before she came.
Mhm.
And the reason why I think that was so awesome is because when you're an entrepreneur or, when you're a merchant, you're an entrepreneur of your little business at the time, like I was doing sweaters. Um, the decisions you make in an office, will be really different if you're not actually out on the floor interacting with the customer and understanding what does it look like when it's in the store?
Or trying to
Um,
build a wall. That is a complete
yeah, like how,
nightmare on paper. And when you're trying to get it
Mhm.
in every store and with the same products and still be aesthetic in every single one. I can
Exactly.
kind of relate to what you're talking about. It's bringing me back to my American Eagle and Justice days.
Exactly.
And I
Yes.
remember merchants would come in from headquarters and they would ask us, okay, like, what are you guys doing? How are you doing it? And then
Yes.
they would say, this is how let's do it better. Let's fluff the jeans, that kind of thing. So when you're sharing your perspective, I'm like, it's all connecting. It's all
Yeah.
makes sense. And then I think it does kind of elaborate on our next point of how you're continuing to build.
Yeah, exactly. And you're exactly right. And merchants would come in and do that. But now merchants had to work in the store. And one of the things I quickly realized was when I would be in these stores, the employees at the store are working and they were not talking about the product the way that we were talking about it when we came up with it. There was a huge gap between what headquarters knew was the strategy behind the product, why it was important, what trend it fulfilled, and the associate doing it. They were still great associates, but there was just like this knowledge gap
Yeah.
and a way one of the things I quickly noticed was you weren't just selling the daughter or the son. Mom was usually buying the item. So you had two people you had to sell to, usually as an associate. And I don't think a lot of the associates thought of it like that. And so, that was like a mental note that I took in my mind, like, this is interesting. Like, as a merchant, I'm at headquarters, I'm talking about it like this, but the store associate is not talking about it like this. And they did a lot of initiatives to work on that, but it was far apart from each other. And the store associate was definitely not, what's the word? An expert on what trends were out there. They maybe were like in a mini way their own model by what they were wearing, but they were not like an expert on what was coming down the pipeline in terms of trend. So I bookmarked that. And then I went to the country's, after that, I worked for the country's largest grocery store. And this is actually where I think, passion for entrepreneurship started to develop. I worked for Kroger. They're headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. I worked for their data analytics company. It's called 8451. And what 8451 does is anytime, I don't know if you've been to a Kroger or a Mariano's, but you put your cell phone number in. Yeah, well, you put your cell phone number in and it gets you basically all these savings in the store.
Mhm.
And you think it's just savings, but what it actually is we actually would take your data and track it at a household level. So we'd be able to know, Shay, hey, you actually were drinking regular milk up until April of 2019, and you actually switched into plant-based milk. And when you switched into plant-based milk, you switched into almond milk. And then we saw you go into soy milk, but it was vanilla, and then you basically aggregate this data over millions and millions of households. So you could come up with different insights and strategies. So if you saw somebody, just take the plant-based milk example, what you would know in that first year is, hey, 80% of households, when they enter plant-based milk, they enter it in the almond milk and vanilla SKU. And then so you can send them a coupon for that. There's like a lot of things you could do. And I worked on the natural and organic side. So a lot of people don't know this, but Kroger is the #1 seller of natural and organic product in the country. And what I did was I helped work on like a big research project with natural and organic. I met with a lot of natural and organic entrepreneurs. They would do a lot of these presentations to get onto Kroger's shelves. And in that time of meeting all these people, I thought to myself, like, it's so cool. They just had this idea and they are bringing it to life and they're fulfilling a need that customers need. And they are going to impact maybe, at least 70 million households will be in a Kroger. And so it's really, really cool. I was just fascinated by that. And specifically CPG products, because again, it's consumer facing. And it's a lot of it is psychology. A lot of it's like, what attributes do you put on the front of the product? What's the coloration of it? What's the pricing of it? Like, what is the branding? A lot of it's all psychology. So, but again, when I was at Kroger, I quickly recognized that Kroger is a little different because a lot of people walk in the store and they know what they need to buy, but the store associate was not very much involved in the customer journey. But I still felt like there was opportunity for them to be more involved or to help push along sales. So that's kind of like my experience that led me to Leaf. When I got to Leaf, I actually didn't start Leaf myself. I had met the founders of Leaf. And when they told me about the idea of Leaf, I wasn't really interested in cannabis at the time, to be honest with you. It was not something that I had ever even thought of in my mind as, it's not that I wasn't interested in it, it just never crossed my mind to be in that industry. But when they talked to me about the product idea of cannabis, of Leaf, and I think that the most important point about Leaf, and when you think about the landscape in which it comes into, is that cannabis is a new industry. And, a lot of people are walking into a dispensary for the first time or even their first dozen times in the last 5 years. And one of the things that is going to happen often is what we know is that 9 times out of 10, a customer walks into a dispensary and they're going to ask an associate on the floor for a product recommendation. Now that could look something like, what's the best thing I can do to go to sleep easier? I need help with anxiety. Or maybe it's just, I just want to get really high. Whatever that use case is, they're asking the store associate for their recommendation one way or another. And then 8 times out of 10, the customer actually takes one of the first 4 recommendations that a store associate tells them. So if you think about business, and most of business is psychology, but it's also finding economic leverage points is how I think about business. And there you have a huge economic leverage point. You have this $15 hour employee responsible for driving thousands of dollars of gross margin just through their word of mouth recommendation. That is a crazy economic leverage point. And
I don't know they have most
yeah,
of the time.
most of the time they're not thinking about that. I think brands do think about it that way, but they don't share in that economic upside either. They're just, they make $15 an hour, whether they sell $3,000 of products or whether they sell $2 a product.
Right.
But I think that was a really interesting insight that the original people that worked at Leaf understood. And that was the whole idea behind Leaf, is where do we find these economic leverage points in these various retail industries? And then they thought, okay, how do we get brands to be one of the first 4 brands that a store associate talks about? So, one of the things I first did was I did a bunch of store walks. And you quickly realize that these store associates honestly were just talking about the product, like, just basically what you could read off the front of it. They didn't really, or what they personally believed about the product. There was a huge gap between like the way the CMO or the founder of a brand would talk about the product versus the store associate. And the whole goal of Leaf is to close that gap. And how do you make it so that the store associate will actually recommend the right product at the right time and tell the customer the things that the founder or the CMO would have wanted the customer to know about that product? And that should create an authentic product recommendation, so a sale. It should also create a repeat customer if you're actually listening to their needs and recommending the right product for them. They are more likely to become a loyal customer, and loyalty is one of the most important things you can drive when you're building a brand. And coming from my background in retail, what I love about the business of Leaf is that it's a win-win-win for everybody. It's a win for the store associate. It's a win for the retailer because they're driving sales, and it's a win for the brand because they're getting in front of their most important economic leverage point. And so I love Leaf for that reason. And I love being in a business where it's like literally everyone in the ecosystem wins. And because it exists, it makes the whole industry a little bit better. The one thing I should say about Leaf that I think is what is the secret about Leaf is when brands use Leaf to target associates with educational media, the secret to what we do and why we get double-digit engagement rates is because we offer micro rewards or micro incentives. So what does that mean? So that we give like $5 for a store associate to watch a video about Kiva. We give them $3 to look at a sell sheet about Kiva and answer quiz questions, right, about the product. So really reinforcing the key selling points. And they can cash out on PayPal or Venmo all through our app after engaging with it. So, some of this stuff is cannabis specific, but if you think about the technology and the idea of paying people or store associates to engage with brands and to better understand brands and to become better sellers, that whole idea, I think, is extremely lucrative in other retail industries that are high affinity. So think like you and I, when we walk into Sephora, we're usually talking to a store associate about, I might ask like, what vitamin C serum should I order? Or what's the best eyeliner do you think in the store? And what they tell me, I'm probably going to test, or I'll at least remember.
Right. I definitely agree. And when you're talking about that experience going into a store, and one from a merchandise perspective, like, okay, what are they doing? How are they talking about it? But two, from a consumer perspective, when you're talking about loyalty and making a customer happy, that's the exact thing. If someone's going to recommend a bad product, they try it, they're not going to come back. That's a lost
Mhm.
opportunity right there.
Yes.
I know we just have a few minutes left, but I'd love to know your biggest takeaway, not from the model of Leaf, just the overall experience. It doesn't have to be cannabis related at all, just what you've kind of taken away and what you've learned about yourself. One, as a woman in business, and two, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Man, there's so much. I think there is a different set of challenges that I think come from maybe being a woman in business, but there's also a different set of pros. And I think sometimes as women, sometimes I've noticed in women that we come at it like we're at this deficit. And in some, I guess certain ways we are, but I think we should also celebrate the fact that in many ways we come with a lot of upsides too that can help us in business. So I think things like being emotional, maybe more emotionally intelligent, uh, there's a lot of different things that go into that. I think some of the things that I've learned about entrepreneurship in general is that the worst thing, actually the best thing you can do is to just make a lot of action. Like you just need to move quickly. And I think perfect sometimes get in the way of doing something. And I think that is what I've learned is that's the most costly thing. Like if you have, an opportunity to email one of the biggest brands and you have their attention, you need to get that email out to them. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. It's better that you just get it done.
Mm.
And so that's a very small example, but I think when you compound that over time, I think just like action, 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 action is what really matters. And then one thing I've noticed lately too, as being an entrepreneur, is something that's happening a lot is talent is now global. It's not, you're not just confined to the talent that's in your city or where your office is. Now, one upside of COVID is now we're hiring talent all over the world. And there's a lot of I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with that. Like one of our best employees lives in South Africa. And I think that is so cool that we can give her one, a great opportunity. But then two, like we're able to reduce costs that way. And, I think there's something there for entrepreneurs when they're building something out to start thinking about their talent teams as global now, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Kind of speaking on actions, there is so much that we can touch on and so much that we didn't get time to. So if there's anything that you want to share within your story that you didn't get to share with today, send me a message, anything like that, anything works. I appreciate you hopping on so much. I think your story is so important to share and the perspective that you have like, okay, yes, psychology, but it's also business and this is how we can put all those puzzle pieces together is so valuable. So I'm very
Yeah.
excited and I also just want to say congratulations on Blush and Cellar. Those sound absolutely amazing and I can't wait to learn more about them. So thank you again, and then just have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah. And message me if you need anything. No problem at all.
Perfect, and I'll keep you updated on the project and share the final
Yeah,
product.
please do. Okay, sounds good. Bye, Shay. It's lovely to see you
Have a good
again.
one.
Bye.